All right, welcome everybody to the third day of the Western Regional Panel annual meeting. My name is Leah Elwell. Sorry, I'm just trying to get that the welcome screen up. And I just wanted to do stuff, of course, slightly different than the last 2 days. As I said, this is day 3 of our multi-day annual meeting. And today is our contributed paper session. So in just a couple of minutes, I'll hand over the chatting to some of our other friends and colleagues. But I wanted to start first with, just wanted to do, because it's Thursday, I could do a little Throwback Thursday. So this is from an annual meeting many years ago, and I just wanted to show this. And if anybody knows the possible date and location of this meeting, then you can go ahead and put that into the question or the chat. And I don't want random guesses, as accurate as you can be. But I guess in sharing this photo, all I want to say too is that a lot of the faces and names have changed over the years that I've been lucky enough to be affiliated with the WRP. But one thing has remained constant. This group has been really productive, really collaborative, really positive in doing a lot of great accomplishments of invasive species management in the West. So pleased and proud to be affiliated with the WRP. So just keep looking at this picture, and I just want to go over then the sort of business at hand here in terms of the meeting itself. So if you do have a question for any of our presenters during the day, please put that in the question or the chat box. It's helpful to me if you put who the question is directed to at the front of your question. All of these webinars are being recorded, and they will be posted on the Western Regional Panel's YouTube channel. And also after the meeting, I will be sending out a little survey to get your impressions on how the week went and your thoughts about participating in 2022. And for this afternoon or later on this evening, we are hosting a happy hour with bingo. So please join us just to hang out. We can see more faces this way. It'll be on a Zoom channel. If you want to join that and you don't know where to find that link, that is on the WRP's website under the annual meeting page that you can find across the top menu bar. And then finally, if you are not on the WRP listserv and you want to be, just send me a quick email and I will put that in the chat box so you can do that for yourselves. So without further ado, let's see, I want to see if anybody got, oh, of course someone got it correct. And it's probably because they took the picture. So correct. This picture was from the Salt Lake City 2012 annual meeting. So that prize goes to John Welschlager. So good job. All right, with that, I would like to introduce, I guess, our moderator for the session today is Nate Owens, and he will be presenting our speakers today. And I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and let Adam be our presenter. So
great, thank you, Leah. Welcome again, everyone, to another great afternoon. We're going to be tackling the contributed paper session today. We got a great lineup of speakers for you. To kick things off, we're going to, tackle something relatively simple and straightforward: eDNA. Relax. I can already feel the tension in the room rising, the anxiety rising. But don't worry, we got Adam Sepulveda with the USGS that's going to help us wade through this. Adam's a research ecologist at the USGS Northern Rocky Mountain Science Center in Bozeman, Montana. And his research primarily focuses on risk assessment and early detection of aquatic invasive species. So with that, Adam, take it away.
All right, Nate, thank you. My screen's showing up as hoped.
Looks great.
You're good.
Okay, perfect. All right, thank you. So today I'm going to talk about what do we do after an environmental DNA detection. And this is a project that I worked on with David Smith, who's with the USGS in West Virginia at the Eastern Ecological Science Center, and also with a whole host of other collaborators, including Nate and Skylar with Utah, Mike Rao and Eric Cram with the Central Utah Water Conservancy District, and then a bunch of other USGSers from across the country that are primarily involved with environmental DNA or aquatic invasive species issues, and then Brittany White with the US Bureau of Reclamation. So a big group of us got together this past year and tried to tackle this question of what should you do after an environmental DNA detection? My presentation will be divided up into 4 different sections. First, a brief background on environmental DNA and why it's a really fantastic but still imperfect tool. Then I'll talk specifically about a Dreissena mussel case study, and then the decision model that we used to evaluate what do we do after we get an environmental DNA detection, an eDNA detection of Dreissena mussel DNA. And then I'll briefly talk about some next steps of what we hope to do in the future. I guess I wanted to just from the get-go really emphasize that what I'm presenting today is a case study. The results are not universally generalizable. I'm going to be talking about a decision focused on one specific reservoir with one specific set of objectives and attributes. And the results hopefully will be helpful. I do not intend for them to be nerve-wracking or upsetting. Again, they are a case study. They're only applicable to this specific reservoir with different objectives and outcomes that we evaluated. So with that, briefly talk about environmental DNA. For most people on here, I think very few people need a refresher on what environmental DNA is. So I won't go into detail there. I'll just simply say it is a way of taking an environmental sample, which for us usually means a water sample, and doing a molecular detection of the DNA that could be in that water. The study or the field of environmental DNA dates back actually to the 1990s, and the publication record has been tremendous over the last decade, especially since 2008, when environmental DNA was first used on a macroorganism, the American bullfrog in Europe. Since then, we've seen hundreds of papers every year published on the topic. And now there is a very good general consensus that environmental DNA, it works. It's a sensitive tool for detecting DNA of a rare organism. It usually has a much lower false negative rate than non-molecular tools. And it can be used for guiding management decisions or actions. And we're starting to see, I guess, kind of that transition from R&D to application happening. A great example here is some of the good work that the Canada DFO has done recently, which is providing actual guidance on how managers there could think about using targeted environmental DNA samples. There's a large program in the Great Lakes region focused on eDNA as it applies to Asian carp. And more recently, there was a guidance document put out by NISC that provides some recommendations for, again, how managers should consider eDNA for decision making with a specific focus on limitations. So we're at a place now, again, where there's general acceptance that it is a sensitive method, but we're also at a place now where we've realized it's not a silver bullet. It's an imperfect tool. I think a lot of people forget that DNA or environmental DNA detects the DNA in the water sample. It does not necessarily detect species presence. You're using your DNA detections to infer. Another word for infer is guess or estimate. To estimate species presence at the site. Again, it's not directly measuring species presence at the site. And I think as many people here recognize, you could get a positive eDNA detection if you have a living fish present at the site, if you have a dead fish present at the site, or if you have DNA residue from that fish that got transported by watercraft or potentially by a bird. All of these could result in a positive environmental DNA detection, but only one of them is really telling you that you have presence at the site. And unfortunately, with this tool in its current form, we don't know what the actual source is, whether it's a live fish, dead fish, or the residue. So that means there's uncertainty with this tool. We don't really know how many times the eDNA detection is a result of a live fish or how many times it's from residue. So there is uncertainty. And that's one of the biggest limitations or imperfections of this tool. So now we're kind of faced with this problem. We recognize broadly as in invasive species management and biology that early detection rapid response is critical. The earlier you can detect something, the more likely you are to be able to control it and limit its spread and negative impacts. We don't have many good tools in the toolbox for early detection. eDNA is a good tool for it, but it could result in a misleading inference. So the big question that many of us are thinking about is that given all this uncertainty of what an eDNA detection means, is it a living fish, a dead fish, or DNA residue? What rapid response actions should managers take after you get an eDNA early detection? And so what we use as a tool to think about this really hard decision is something called structured decision making, which is quite common or is becoming very common for natural resources, but it's a very common tool in the business world and the engineering world. It's used often in fields where you have really no control over the ultimate outcome. So for example here, the ultimate outcome would be if mussels establish and infest. We have very little control over that. And there's a lot of uncertainty down the way. So this tool, structured decision making, SDM, what it does is it brings together decision makers and stakeholders to identify what they want the outcome to be at the end of the day, and what are the critical objectives and alternatives that they want to manage for, with alternatives being the different actions they could take. And then it also brings together technical experts like myself and others at the USGS that then try to associate probabilities of an outcome actually happening given an alternative action that you take. So whether you do control or containment or no action, what's the likelihood that an outcome is going to happen? And so what you're trying to do with this SDM process is to create a framework that hopefully increases the odds of a good outcome and decreases the odds of a bad outcome. And so we applied this SDM framework to a case study in Utah at Jordanelle Reservoir. We all know Quagga zebra mussels are a very costly problem. They have huge economic implications if they invade, as well as social and ecological. Jordanelle Reservoir is, I think, a really good poster child for this problem because it has a lot of the attributes that we associate with very challenging decisions. There's a dam there that provides hydropower, but also water storage and water delivery for the Salt Lake region, which now has over 1 million people. It's a large reservoir, so any type of EDRR effort is going to be very difficult to implement and incredibly costly. And there's also huge recreation value. A lot of people on the Salt Lake Wasatch Range there, that's what they use for water recreation. So a lot of boaters, a lot of water skiers, campers, fishing, etc. So any action you take is probably going to upset somebody, if not large groups of people, no matter what you do here. And that's kind of representative of many of the challenges that managers face anytime they make a decision. They're going to upset somebody. So there's large potential costs. So we got different decision makers and stakeholders that are pertinent to Jordanelle Reservoir together virtually this past year. This includes US Bureau of Reclamation, Central Utah Water Conservancy District, Utah Division of Wildlife Resources, and Utah Division of Parks and Recreation. These groups all have some type of management authority or association with Jordanelle Reservoir. We got those groups together, or those entities together, to formally craft a problem statement, which is what are the appropriate actions to take following more than one eDNA detection of Quagga zebra mussel DNA at Jordanelle? What action should you take immediately within weeks versus long-term for up to 8 years? We worked with these decision makers and stakeholders to create an objective hierarchy. So what we were trying to get at is what are the top level or the fundamental objectives, which are shown on the right end of the screen under the ends. versus the primary objectives, which are shown on the left screen as a means. So we went through this process where we asked them to think about what do you want and why. They'd come up with that, and then we'd ask why, and then we'd ask why again. And eventually we ended up at these end or fundamental objectives, which were kind of the ultimate things they wanted to focus on. These included minimizing the costs of any type of rapid response effort. So that's sampling costs, mitigation costs, maximizing public support for the management program, protecting the ecosystems. This included both Jordanelle Reservoir, but also spread to other water bodies, maximizing recreational access, and protecting the water supply. So that's ultimately the outcomes that they wanted to manage for. So this is the same thing, but just in a table form. What I want to identify here is that each of these end or fundamental objectives was weighted differently based on their importance. So Nate with Utah Division of Wildlife Resources and others decided that the most important objective here is maintaining public support for their management program. That received a weight of 10. And then secondly, protecting the ecosystem and specifically minimizing the potential to spread to other water bodies had the second highest importance. That was an 8. All the other objectives had much lower importance, including maintaining recreation, minimizing costs, and protecting the water supply. For other reasons I won't go into, but the critical thing here is that first and foremost, what we were trying to achieve was maintaining public support and protecting the ecosystem by minimizing spread to other water bodies. So we worked with the decision makers and stakeholders to come up with a list of potential alternative actions they could take. So we created a little bit of a decision tree. So decision point 1 is when you get those eDNA detections and you have to make a decision of what to do next. So one potential alternative is that you can go out and use non-molecular tools to verify that eDNA detection. So that's often, I think, what many people tend to do here is they go out, if it's mussels, they go out and try to use plankton toes or settling plates or scuba to figure out if those eDNA detections are indeed indicative of a living present mussel population. Another alternative that you could take is institute immediate containment actions. So in this case, putting up exit watercraft inspections for all boats leaving Jordanelle. Another option is you can do both contain and control. So the same watercraft inspections, but also you could do a molluscicide application, in this case, EarthTech QZ as an example. So that's kind of one set of outcomes. We could look at it in a bigger picture. And what I want you to focus on here is if you attempt to confirm, so using those non-molecular tools, then you're faced with a second decision point. What do you do if you confirm it or fail to confirm it? So if you fail to confirm it, that no, which is an upper branch, then you can do the same sort of things. You can either choose no action at that point, contain or contain and control, or if you do indeed confirm it, again, you can decide to do no action, contain or contain and control. So these are the different alternatives that we assessed in our decision framework. And I'll get into the results here, but first I want to identify that we now the USGS statisticians and quantitative experts came in and attempted to associate the probability of achieving your outcome, so achieving your different fundamental objectives based on different alternative actions. Those alternative actions are listed in the columns on the far right of this table. And what we did is we tried to poke and prod this model as hard as possible by looking to see how robust the results would be to uncertainty. So we looked at what would happen if an infestation of mussels occurs at 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, up to 8 years, or if it failed to occur. What happened if mussels spread really fast, the rapid spread scenario versus the rules of 10 scenario, which assumes that most mussel invasions fail and only 10% make it to establishment. Most of those fail and only another 10% make it to spread. And then we also looked at a bunch of different parameters. We modeled worst case outcomes where we took the 10th percentile of our parameter, median, our typical case where we took the 50th percentile, and best case where we took the 90th percentile of each of the different potential outcomes here. So we really tried to shake this as hard as we could to make sure that whatever answers we come up with were robust to any uncertainty that we had going into the issue. Go back one slide. And what I want to point out here is I have different colors on here. And if you look down the column, what I want you to focus on here is that no single action, contain, control, no action, is all green. Green represents the best outcome. What you should see is that each column has usually green and yellow, green, yellow, and red, or lots of red. And that's a way of saying that no matter what decision you make, there's trade-offs. It's going to be hard to achieve the best outcome for all of your objectives with a single decision. Some are going to maximize outcomes for one objective, but minimize outcomes for other objectives. And so what we get for results here, and I'll walk you through these figures, is on the x-axis is cumulative performance. So this is how you would expect the outcome to be across all of your objectives, with a 1 meaning that you maximize all your objectives, and a 0 meaning that you achieve none of your objectives. And your different alternative actions are on the y-axis: contain, control and contain, delayed containment. So that's when you first go out and try to confirm it. And whether you confirm it or not, you then institute containment actions or control and containment, or you decide to do nothing. So what I want you guys to see here is on the left side of the bar, that is the result if you're using kind of that worst case scenario. On the far right side is the result if you're using the best case scenario. And that gap in the middle of each of the bars is your median or typical case scenario. And so what we're seeing here is that this alternative of delayed containment, first going out and trying to confirm it, and regardless if you confirm it or not, instituting containment actions, so mandatory watercraft inspection stations. What that does is it maximizes the upsides of your decision and it minimizes the downsides. So it has the highest upside scores if everything goes right, and it has the lowest downside scores if things go wrong. So this looks to be, I guess, the most optimal decision based on the framework that we used. It's very robust, whether we're assuming that mussels tend to fail, to spread slowly or to often fail, so that rules of 10 scenario, or if they spread really fast, we get the same answer that delayed containment tends to be the optimal solution or the optimal decision. We can also look at it a little bit differently here with the same result. On the x-axis, we have the probability of non-molecular confirmation. And on the y-axis, we have that same cumulative performance score, where 1 is achieving all your objectives and a 0 is achieving none of your objectives. And then we have our worst case, typical case, and best case parameters. And then the different boxes are rules of 10 or rapid spread, so there's different invasion scenarios. And regardless of if we are able to confirm mussels with non-eDNA, or if we fail to confirm them, it still looks like delayed containment, which is that red dashed line, tends to be the best. So this is kind of a long, weighty way of saying the results of delayed containment are very robust to outcome and parameter uncertainty. So no matter what, delayed containment tends to be the optimal decision for Jordanelle Reservoir. Why? It has very large upside gains. So if you are able to find it with non-eDNA, then you get the public support. So that's a big win there. And if you do containment, then you reduce spread to other waters. And it looks like you lose nothing by waiting 4 weeks or a month or however long it takes you to do the non-eDNA, because that's going to have negligible influence on mussel spreading to other waters. So the way that poker players or gamblers would call this is it's a free roll. It only has upsides and it has really no downsides in the decision space. And if we can kind of briefly compare it to no action, The upsides of doing delayed containment, it would save you about, or the upsides of doing no action, it saves you about $400,000 a year. And there's only a marginal increase in public support if mussels do not invest. The downsides of doing no action, you would have a huge loss in public support if mussels do invest, and you would potentially have mussels spread to other waters. So that's kind of the extreme comparison. And so what we're left with now is Nate with State of Utah and others now have this decision process. It's meant to guide them in their decision making. It's meant to be a decision support process, not a decision mandate. And the important thing here is that we've opened up their eyes to the different trade-offs and to where it looks like it's worthwhile in investing more time and money to get better information. Next steps is that we hope to work with likely the state of Maine to test this model on in a very different system with different stakeholders, different objectives, and different taxa. So we're going to take this framework to Sebago Lake in Maine, hopefully this winter, and look to see how it applies to things like hydrilla, New Zealand mud snails, Asian clams, and also dreissenids in a very different place. And then finally, we're developing a graphic user interface, so a Shiny app that will allow managers to input their values into this template and hopefully better evaluate how different alternative actions would affect the outcomes. So that's all I have to share. So thank you for your time.
Great, Adam, thank you. So I have, if you have any questions for Adam, please pop those into the question box or the chat area. I do have one, it's I think more of like a comment for you to maybe follow up on. So Linda Shaw asks, it seems like delayed containment would be optimal in a closed system like a reservoir, but not necessarily in an open or connected nature of a marine water body or marine waters. Can you want to comment on that? Comment?
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's, that's why I tried to ask her at the very beginning that this is a decision process that is specific to Jordanelle. I think, Linda, when we take this model domain, we're trying to challenge it with a very different system to see if we come up with the same result or not. So how generalizable is delayed containment across systems? Versus how, I guess, specific or context specific is this decision solution. It would be really interesting to attempt this in a more open or more connected system in future efforts. Our next system is going to be a closed system like Sebago Lake, so we won't have a good answer for you, but at least we'll have an answer of how different stakeholders and objectives could change the result for what the optimal decision would be.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, sorry, I've got okay, I have a couple more questions. So Teresa Tome asks, was the cost estimate of a WID program specific to estimates for implementing WID, meaning watercraft inspection and decontamination at Jordanelle Reservoir, the $410,000 a year?
Yep, all those estimates were specific and provided by Nate Owens and Skylar Wolf with Utah DWR.
Okay, and then John Walschlager wants to give you some applause for taking this issue on, recognizing the challenges and the powerful tool that eDNA is. So it's more of a kudos to you from John Walschlager.
Thanks, John.
Okay, let's see. And it looks like, I think we still have time. Yep. So Sam Chan asks, it sounds more in a statistician level. So he says he may have missed this earlier. Is there a confidence level and an R2 to your model?
No, the model comprises many different simulations and modeling efforts for each of the different objectives. And then it creates kind of a composite. So we don't really have like a model fit per se. What we did to evaluate, I guess, the equivalent of a model fit, which is a way of getting out uncertainty, is by doing the simulations with your median value for your parameter estimate, your 10th percentile, and your 90th percentile to kind of provide that range of confidence. So we did that in lieu of more of a traditional R-squared or standard error, standard deviation.
Okay. Well, I think you're off the hook. No more questions for you, Adam. Great work.
All right.
Interesting. All right. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thank you, Adam. And I'll just say it right now. It was a really cool thing to be a part of. A really cool process that they had in place. So I would encourage anyone that's interested in trying to figure out a way to make decisions around eDNA to contact Adam, because I think that exercise would be useful to you. So now, getting away from eDNA, we are going to go to the development of standardized invasive mussel risk assessment and bioeconomic models for the Missouri River Basin. And Tim Cunahan from the USGS is going to lead us through this. Tim's a research fishery biologist for the USGS Western Fisheries Research Center. He has 28 years of experience conducting research on the Columbia River ecosystem and large rivers in the US. He's been actively involved in the WRP for over a decade and has been a USGS representative to the 100th Meridian Group's Columbia Basin team for as long as he can remember, and currently helps to facilitate the Columbia River Basin Dreissenid Mussel Monitoring Forum that convenes as part of the Columbia Basin team. Tim, you're up.
Thanks, Nate. I can have a hard time envisioning that I actually wrote all that stuff down for you to read. Sorry about that, but it's good to be here, and we're looking forward to talking to you all about our project. I am going to be tag teaming this presentation with Lucas Bear, who's an economist at the Grand Canyon Research and Monitoring Center down in Flagstaff, Arizona. We also want to acknowledge our co-authors, Wes Daniel and Matt Nielsen at the Wetlands and Aquatic Research Center, the non-Indigenous aquatic species database folks down there in Florida, and also Joseph Raymond and Mike Springborn, who we're collaborating with from the University of California at Davis. Next slide. This project was funded by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as part of the Quagga and Zebra Mussel Action Plan. The goal of our project is essentially the title of our presentation, and was a specific research need called out in QZAP. And that goal is to develop standardized risk assessment and bioeconomic models for the Missouri River Basin, with the intent of providing managers with information that will allow them to make decisions about how to allocate financial resources. The specific objectives of our project include compiling water quality data, so we can assign establishment risk to water bodies in the Missouri River Basin, compiling information that describes the attractivity of water bodies, things that attract user groups to water bodies, such as boat ramps, marinas, campgrounds, and other factors. We're going to briefly describe some of our efforts to use the watercraft inspection and decontamination data provided to us towards this effort. And then Lucas is going to jump in and discuss more specifics about how we're going to roll that information up and also incorporate sociological and economic data to develop a bioeconomic model. The ultimate goal here, I guess, is to develop an interactive tool in coordination with our Missouri River Basin stakeholders so that they can interact with and use this information. Next slide, please. Missouri River Basin is a large river basin that encompasses a significant portion of the continental United States, as shown in these figures. It has a basin area of approximately 1.4 million square kilometers. The river that drains this basin, the major river, is the Missouri River. The Missouri River originates in Montana with the confluence of three of my favorite rivers on the planet. and flows approximately 3,800 kilometers to its confluence with the Mississippi River. Major tributaries to the Missouri include the Yellowstone and Platte Rivers. Next slide, please. The underlying intent of this project is to provide protection to aquatic resources in the Missouri River Basin. There's obviously a lot of very valuable aquatic resources in the Missouri River Basin, that including facilities that generate hydropower, provide for flood control and water storage for irrigation in municipalities. Obviously, there's a lot of valuable fisheries in the basin, including endangered and threatened species. The Missouri River Basin obviously provides a lot of myriad of different recreational opportunities, which are very valuable. Next slide, please. So in the next few slides, several slides, I'll be presenting information that will reference HUC units, hydrologic unit code. These units are essentially scaled, nested watershed boundaries, subdivisions that range from being relatively large geographies to going all the way down to the sub-watershed level. For the purposes of this presentation, we are going to present some information at the HUC 10 level and also at the HUC 4 level, as indicated in this figure, to orient people to that. Next slide, please. So in this project, we are fortunate to actually build on our previous efforts in the Columbia River Basin, which include being able to characterize risk categories with respect to water quality. This is establishment risk, essentially the risk that that zebra and quagga mussels will establish to a water body if they make it there. So we're fortunate to have worked with our Columbia River Basin partners, and in addition, external partners that include Bob McMahon and David Wong. So that kind of gave us a leg up on this project. Next slide, please. So using those classifications, we were able to compile water quality data and characterize calcium and pH-based risk for the Missouri River Basin at the HUC 10 level. To orient you to these graphs, the purple areas are high risk, yellow low, orange moderate. And as you can see from these figures, it appears that the Missouri River Basin is pretty much ubiquitously at high risk for mussel establishment. Next slide, please. To kind of contrast that to what we had observed previously in the Columbia River Basin, the Columbia River Basin had more areas that were characterized as low or moderate risk, but you can see as you head over into the Missouri River Basin, it becomes pretty much ubiquitously high, which has certain implications with respect to how we characterize risk in those two areas and the relative contribution of water quality versus other types of risk like introduction risk. Also wanted to show you this figure to give you an idea of exactly the breadth of information that we're starting to compile. As part of these efforts, we now have information that encompasses a pretty large portion of the Western United States. Next slide. We've also gone through and compiled information that describes the attractivity of water bodies, a variety of different measures. These are a couple of examples. In the upper left-hand panel, we have some of the number of boat ramps by HUC 10 in the Missouri River Basin. These data are from a new database that the non-indigenous aquatic species folks are putting together that describes the location of boat ramps in the continental United States. So this is very useful, and we're thankful to be able to draw on that information. And to give you an example of some of the other things we're looking at compiling information on recreational facilities. And this is an example of that where we summed the Forest Service recreational facilities by HUC 10 in the Missouri River Basin. Next slide, please. We're also looking at other measures, including water body size. These data were derived from the National Hydrography Data Set housed by the USGS. The upper left-hand panel is mean water body perimeter by HUC 10, and the bottom right panel is max water body area by HUC 10. Again, we're just compiling these different layers, which are going to feed into the model development. Next slide, please. With respect to the watercraft and inspection and decontamination data, we're working to try to figure out where boaters are coming from and whether they're coming from infested regions. This is a work in progress. I think we're having more success at this point in time determining where people are coming from in relative numbers. Probably a more difficult time actually trying to figure out exactly where they're going within the Missouri River Basin, but we're working on that. To give you an example of some of the things we've done so far, the upper left-hand panel characterizes the number of contacts by Montana watercraft inspection and decontamination stations in 2020. The purple areas indicate areas where there are larger numbers, and the blue shades fewer. As you can see, as expected, more contacts from closer in and fewer contacts from farther out. We're going to look at that data in the context of the data in the bottom right-hand panel, which characterizes the number of tricidid mussel infested water bodies by HUC 4. These are both at the HUC 4 level at this point. So again, trying to compile these information that will feed into the model development. Next slide. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lucas Baer, who's going to describe considerations for the bioeconomics of mussel invasion in the Missouri River Basin. Lucas.
Thanks, Tim. Let me, there we go. Appreciate it. So as Tim mentioned, I'm going to discuss a little bit of the development of the bioeconomic modeling that we plan to do for this project. And in my mind, there's several components of sort of integrating this information that we've collected to help provide a useful decision tool to AIS managers. So Tim talked about sort of the environmental risk or the habitat suitability index that we've developed by HUC level. Also some of this attractivity or connectivity sort of data. So not only NHD plus information, boat ramp information, but also the watercraft inspection database. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the other sort of online information that might be available to us to help sort of validate and sort of support some of this inspection data. I think that's one of the newer things that might be available to researchers and may provide some value, but that's kind of ongoing. But like I said, I'll talk a little bit about that here soon. But once we have this data collected, it's important for us to, and this is what we're doing now, is to identify resource priorities within states, within watersheds. If there are resource priorities, a lot of ongoing discussions with managers have led to the conclusion that objectives are to minimize or prevent infestation with the resources made available, but we also want to make room in the modeling framework for priorities, whether that's priorities associated with specific water bodies or priorities related to specific resources within a watershed or within a HUC. So I'll talk about that. And then we also want to be very specific about prevention measures, how effective they are, one, and also costs associated with those prevention measures. Because in the end, what we want to do, our overall goal is to come up with a useful tool that addresses both effective prevention, but also efficient prevention. In the past, there's been some literature and some work by folks out of, for example, the University of Wyoming, Dave Finoff, who's worked on some optimization type methods. More recently, there's been some recent publications by Fisher and Lewis out of British Columbia, who utilize watercraft inspection data and network science to help prioritize inspection efforts. That's recently been published. And then there's some ongoing work that I don't think has been published yet, or is just starting to be published by a group out of the University of Minnesota and Arizona State University and Resources for the Future. Also, utilizing recent advancements in network science to help think about prioritizing inspection efforts. And that's focused on the state of Minnesota. So you can see that focusing on the Missouri River Basin is a much broader, both geographically and sort of from a management perspective, a little bit more diverse. So, our process now is to, build on these past efforts, look to possibly this network science information, and think about what kind of level of detail and what, specific information is necessary to sort of address this problem. So, one question I have of folks here on the call today is, if there's other groups within your state or at universities of who are working on similar decision tools or efforts to help prioritize, we'd be very interested to hear beyond the groups that I mentioned today. So if you wouldn't mind throwing that in the chat, that would be great, or sending Tim and I an email. So here's some of the example of some of the information that we're starting to pull together to help address this connectivity issue. This is watercraft inspection database for the state of Montana for the last 2 years of information, 2018 to 2020. And the relative size of those circles are the number of inspections that take place, with the colors representing on average how far people that are inspected are traveling from the point of inspection. You can see sort of lighter colors at the border and darker colors sort of central part of the state, with the largest dot there just below Flathead Lake in Montana. So this is some of the information that we're pulling together from the watercraft inspection database to sort of address this issue of connectivity. But as I mentioned, there are some opportunities potentially online, platforms that gather information about folks. We're currently discussing with FishBrain, collecting data. So this is just a sample database here I have displayed of information of unique individuals and their travel to different water bodies to fish, for example. And they upload their fishing information, and FishBrain has agreed to provide unique identifiers so we can identify how people are moving across water bodies and with sort of which frequency. And so this is intended to help support the watercraft inspection data that we have for each of the states within the Missouri River Basin. Another sort of question that we're attempting to address is prioritization of individual HUC level water bodies. Here is an example of some data that we've collected and are starting to organize from the Environmental Protection Agency. So as part of their water quality information, they identify water bodies and their primary uses within a HUC. And so we've been able to organize this information and identify, number of water bodies by the primary uses. And so this gives us an idea of maybe relative importance by HUC 10. You can see a list there on the left of EPA uses that's in this information. Now, this is just an index of, relative number of uses within a HUC 10. We haven't at this point weighted this information, which may be possible with either relative economic value, size of water body, or other measures to further sort of refine and add detail to this information. But in the same process of collecting this water inspection data and use information, and then also turning to online information to help support this, we're reaching out to state AIS managers to better understand what their priorities are and objectives. Like I mentioned, sort of this top level objective has primarily been to minimize or prevent infestation based on existing constraints, financial constraints, but we're also interested in what additional management considerations based on stakeholder needs or specific trade-offs or uncertainties that managers face. We want to know, again, what are some of the priorities, whether that's specific water bodies within a state that are prioritized for prevention, or resource uses, for example. We are also interested in the mitigation measures and costs that have been implemented in the state, and to, in the end, really get at what is a useful tool for AIS managers. So these are example questions, just a subset of some of the questions that we sent out to state AIS managers to really start to make sure that the data we're collecting, we're using in a way that meets their needs. So here's just a quick example of information from one of those questions. And the question was, what impact of mussels invading your water bodies in your state are most concerned about? You can see that first priority for managers that have responded so far are fish and wildlife and recreation, with those second priorities being a little bit more diverse: hydropower, public water supply, agriculture, and recreation. So again, this is intended to supplement our existing effort, make sure we get the framework right in our tool development, and to help further support the model development. So what are our next steps in this process? Well, first, continue to compile and QA/QC the habitat suitability, attractivity, proper yield pressure data that Tim discussed. Continue to collect data and develop the modeling framework for the bioeconomic model. All of this, though, with outreach and engagement with stakeholders in mind. As I mentioned, we've asked formal questions through a survey process of stakeholders to get more information to make sure we're doing a good job of developing the modeling headed in the right direction. We want to make sure that the tool is useful, and this will include beta testing the tool to facilitate sort of that interaction with stakeholders with the tool, and then eventually host the tool on the USGS NAIS website. And so those are the steps that we plan to take here as the project progresses.
Lucas, you have about 3 minutes left. Oh, perfect. We're at Q&A.
Yep.
I'll let you make your closing statement. No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, well, that was it. We're ready for Q&A. So thank you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Lucas and Tim. I do have a couple of questions here. And I did have Joanne Grady shared a contact, and I will get that to you too. So Adam Sepulveda asked, if most inputs are HUC 10 scale or coarser, how can managers interpret results when thinking about specific water bodies?
Oh, I can take that one, Lucas. Our intent is to kind of focus in at a HUC 10 level, but then provide a means for actually listing specific water bodies within a HUC 10. And from that, again, I think when we start to deal with folks that are more familiar with their own particular geography, that then they can start to look at those at more fine-scaled evaluation of which water bodies they think that they should focus in on. So that, I guess that would be, kind of trusting that the AIS managers know more than we do at that point in time, given what they know about their particular realm.
I'll add a little bit. That's a good. Adam has a good question. At the basin scale, it's really difficult from a sort of a decision standpoint, sort of decision modeling, to have a lot of various water bodies or HUC levels. So even though we're presented this information at the HUC 10, we have information at the HUC 12. My guess is that by the time we get to the end of this project, the bioeconomic model for the basin may even be at a rougher scale for some of the work we're doing. However, some of those methods might be able to be focused or downscaled, so to speak, to look at specific subbasins or specific HUCs. And ideally, we could use some of those same methods that we're using from the network science perspective to address some of those questions. So that's a good question. So something we should think about as we move forward is how would you upscale or downscale maybe some of the methods we're going to develop to address some of those specific stakeholder questions.
I agree totally, and it is a difficulty when you start dealing with geographies as large as this to provide kind of a broad scale approach and also fine scale applicability. But we're hoping that also our kind of back and forth with the stakeholders will help refine that for us too. What's most useful for them.
Okay, so I know, let's just squeak in one more question here. For the Missouri Basin work, have Canadian partners to the north been activated, involved, contacted?
Not to date.
Okay. All right, well, that was a quick answer. So how about estimated timeline for this project completion? Do you guys have a sense for that?
We are hoping to wrap this up by next summer.
Excellent.
And I'll just add on the quick add on the connecting with the Canadian folks. I mean, that is a plan. We have already connected with some of the folks that work with in Minnesota on some of this. So our plan is to definitely reach out to folks once we move a little bit further along in the project.
Okay, excellent. Well, in order to keep us on track here, we are going to go to our next speaker, but thank you two for the information. Nate, on to you.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Lucas, for that presentation. We got a lot of really cool decision tools being developed right now that are going to really serve us well over the next few years. That's exciting to see. Next up, we are scanning the horizon for new invasive species, hearing about results of regional efforts in the Pacific Northwest and Alaska from Teresa Thome. And Teresa currently focuses on AIS-related activities throughout the Pacific region, including Washington, Oregon, Idaho, parts of Montana, Hawaii, and the Pacific Islands through the Service's Fish and Aquatic Conservation Program. After earning both an MS in Conservation Ecology and Sustainable Development and a PhD in Ecology from the University of Georgia, she has worked on water resource issues in both North and South America for more than 20 years. Throughout her career, she's focused on a variety of issues, including aquatic invasive species, native fisheries, and water quality monitoring. Teresa, you're up.
All right, I gotta go old school and use my phone here. And hopefully you can see, am I sharing my screen or not?
You're sharing, but you want to put it in present mode instead of editing mode.
Can you see it now? How about now?
Yeah, that looks great. And I can hear you. Go for it. Thanks, Teresa.
All right. So first of all, thank you so much for a chance to present today. And oops, I can't see. All right. So, and again, I am here speaking on behalf of the Fish and Wildlife Service and many people that have helped be participating in our horizon scanning work. Sorry, I'm still trying to figure out my screen here. Okay. All right. I just want to double check. Can you see the invasion curve graphic?
Yes.
Okay. So hopefully many of you are familiar with this invasion species curve, and really just trying to emphasize that as species are introduced across the landscape, and found to be invasive in the new environment that they are introduced into, it becomes more expensive to manage invasion. And also not just more expense, but just time, just the amount of resources that are expended. And that really prevention is a main focus as far as trying to be more efficient with our resources in dealing with invasive species. And just a little different way of representing this, really again focused on that prevention and preventing arrival and release at both a domestic and international level. And so again, just a little different way of visualizing this, and this is adapted from Lodge et al. In 2006. And so one of the tools that we have for in the realm of prevention is horizon scanning. And so it's a way of being a little bit more proactive in looking at what invasive species are coming to us. And, you know, strictly for horizon scanning for aquatic invasive species, we're looking at a way to do invasive species risk assessment in a systematic way and trying to identify and prioritize threats that are posed by potential invasive species that are not yet established in a region or were just really not on our radar at all. And the work that I'm presenting today from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is focused on regional horizon scanning efforts, but I wanted to just kind of put it into context that there are other horizon scanning projects that are ongoing across the United States and actually internationally as well. But recently, the USGS has been working on a national level horizon scan focused on organisms in trade. So unintentional movement of invasives through trade of live organisms. And then Florida has been doing a lot of work on horizon scanning, not just within the state of Florida, but then also looking at different ecosystems. And so again, just to put our regional horizon scanning in context. And our objective for the regional work was to identify fresh and brackish water fish, macroinvertebrates, or plants at risk of arriving into the United States and establishing populations. And a focus was the unintentional movement of different transportation pathways. So looking at a transportation pathway would be, for example, recreational boats. And right now, we have these different regions that, so the Great Lakes region has been doing horizon scanning work for a long time, a kind of an ongoing iterative process looking at invasion pathways coming into the Great Lakes. The Southeast also is in process of doing a variety of horizon scanning. And then again, our Pacific Northwest work is proposed for California and Nevada, and then also Alaska. And each of these different regional transportation focused horizon scans have had a little different, obviously different geographic scope, but also the pathways. For example, in the Pacific Northwest, we focused on recreational boating. In Alaska, shipping natural dispersal and mechanisms for recreational vehicles and equipment. So again, just a little different focus of the pathways. And again, this was done through a scoping process. And we're going to go a little bit more into the process of our horizon scan. So looking at assembling an advisory group for each of the regions, identifying the target pathways, identifying the geographic region that we wanted to work on, and then the focal taxa. And this is really done with the understanding that, especially for our regional work, this is not an end-all and be-all. It's the beginning of a hopefully a longer-term process. The work in the Great Lakes has been going on for many years. Same with the Southeast, as new pathways or new issues become known, then the definitions of scope, the pathways can be done or redone. So it's not a one-stop shop. So I need to definitely acknowledge the amount of work that our participants for the Pacific Northwest, these are all the agencies and groups of people who participated in our Pacific Northwest and our Horizon Scan work. So thank you to everyone that provided input. And then for Alaska, again, these agencies all provided significant input to the scoping for this Horizon Scan. So didn't want to work in a vacuum. We wanted as much input as possible. And again, since I'm presenting the Pacific Northwest and Alaska, the geographic scope for each area was, we had to narrow, at least for the Pacific Northwest, we did have a narrower geographic scope. And for Alaska, it was the state of Alaska, which is very large. And for the Pacific Northwest, again, the priority pathway was recreational boating. And in Alaska, shipping, aquatic recreation, and natural dispersal pathways were focused. And for shipping, that was commercial shipping and ballast water movement. And for recreational boating, it included tourism. And for the Pacific Northwest, the taxonomic scope really focused on submerged and emergent aquatic plant taxa. And, in general, the floating and submerged aquatic plants were really prioritized for great concern, especially considering the recreational boating pathway having vegetation attached to all kinds of recreational watercraft and trailers and other equipment. And for Alaska, there were, it was really focused at a taxonomic level for the family of clams, the Sirenidae, that includes 48 different genera, but it includes Corbicula that you may be familiar with, Asian clam. And for this family, that's both freshwater and estuarine clams. Then for the also Dracinidae family, which includes 3 genera, which also we are very familiar with, zebra and quagga mussels. The plant, the Hydrocarataceae, that is the tape grass family, and there's actually 16 known genera in that family. Then the snail family of, so these were used to be, snail taxonomy is definitely being moved around, but right now the snail family that includes New Zealand mud snails is Taetidae, and that's both marine, estuarine, and freshwater. And it includes New Zealand mud snails. And then the shore crab family, the Varunidae, that includes Chinese mitten crab, which you may be familiar with. So again, while the Pacific Northwest focused on plants, there was a broader taxonomic scope for Alaska. All right, so back in our horizon scanning process, we've got our focal pathways, our target geographic region, our focal taxa, and the next step was to look at donor regions from the different pathways, and then looking at the climate similarities between the target regions and the donor regions, and then developing a species list of species that potentially could become established, and then looking at whether or not they're present, and then verify species. And then from those species lists, prioritize lists as far as high priority, unknown, maybe low risk. So looking at risk of those from those species lists coming from different donor regions, which ones have actually pose a risk for becoming introduced and becoming established. All right, so this is just an example from the Pacific Northwest. So based on that kind of assessment or looking at the different donor regions and climate suitability, we had 179 valid species. 125 of those were not yet present in the Pacific Northwest. And of that 125, 7 had already been flagged as high risk, and they've already been assessed as far as whether or not there is any risk associated with them becoming established. There were 118 that had not really been looked at as far as risk assessment. Of those, 27 had some type of known history of invasive introduction. And then there were 14 that we had no known trade history at all. So from those 14 of kind of unknown, 13 species had enough information to do some type of risk analysis. Of those 27 species with a known history of introduction, 13 of those had no apparent connection with any kind of trade or transportation. But 6 were present on at least 4 continents. And then we added 1 species based on feedback from our scoping group. All right, so that was just an example of kind of showing the breakdown of the different species. And as far as looking at risk, again, looking at the history of invasiveness in the literature of the different species, connecting climate matching, and then looking at basically an overall risk category of whether or not the species may or may not become introduced. And for the Pacific Northwest, there were 5 species that were identified as high risk. And you probably have heard of some of these species. And again, this is our website for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, where these risk summaries, so all of these species, then a risk assessment summary was completed, and you can find those on this website. And for Alaska, there were 10 high-risk species that were identified. Asian clam, both zebra and quagga mussel, New Zealand mud snail, Brazilian Alodia, so definitely, Brazilian waterweed, hydrilla, African Alodia, and then European frogbit, spiny naiad, and brittle water nymph. So those are ones that you may not have heard of, and so that's part of, again, this assessment, trying to prioritize species. Although there are several that are known, it's not a surprise. There are others that we want to elevate as far as potential high risk. And again, there are risk screening summary reports for all these species, these 10 that are on the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service website. All right, so what now? We have these lists. And this is where, being able to work with our partners and actually going back to our scoping group and really all of the people that are attending this call too, being able to work as a group, looking at developing fact sheets, getting the word out about these species, being able to maybe list these as noxious weeds at the state level if they aren't already, providing some types of training resources on how to ID these species in the field, as well as looking at detection tools in the future, being able to conduct early detection, rapid response. Of course, again, we want to prevent them from coming in, whether it's through domestic or international spread. So again, tying into our model of early detection, rapid response, how horizon scanning, again, it's fitting into that prevention model of helping develop watch lists, preventing things from coming into the U.S. or being spread across, domestic avenues, and then being able to identify, well, where would these species be likely to become invasive, or where would they, where should we target our analysis? And so being able to highlight areas for targeted species monitoring, and then again, developing our information training tools, as well as additional risk screening as more information on these species may become available as more research is done. So just kind of fitting in this horizon scanning into the bigger picture of early detection and rapid response. And again, at a national scale, looking at watch lists and invasion hotspots, as well as our regional scales and local scales and state work. All right, so I definitely want to acknowledge the work that Kate Wyman-Grotham with our Great Lakes Fish and Aquatic Conservation Program has done, as well as Heidi Heim, who's our Northeast Atlantic Appalachian Regional Biologist in Fish and Aquatic Conservation. And then Alan Ployce and Nick Ramsey with Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife provided a lot of the recreational boating information for Washington. Same with Rick Boatner and Martine Riesman in Oregon helped with our providing the boat statistic information for Oregon, and same with Nick for Idaho. And then Robert Walters helped provide some of the watercraft inspection data that helped with at least the recreational watercraft work, looking at that analysis for the Pacific Northwest. And again, thank you to all the scoping phase participants. The work is currently in review. I know I presented the species list. We do have a report really documenting all this work at the regional level for Pacific Northwest and Alaska. Again, that report is in review, and we hope to kind of reinvigorate everyone to review those documents and get those finalized, and then go forward with the next steps on however that will look like for prioritizing, listing these species as noxious if they aren't already. And so I think I can end presenting. That's what I've got. Hopefully we have time for a couple questions.
Absolutely. Thank you, Teresa. Awesome. I do have a question for you, if you're ready.
Yay. Okay.
Okay. So Nate is asking, for the climate matching, did you only look at present climate suitability, or did you consider climate change projections, excuse me?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. And so it depends. Most of it is done just at current climate, and so we haven't included the future climate projections, but we hope to. Definitely for the Pacific Northwest, that's a concern. And with all of our regions, as we do have climate change, we're seeing changes in transportation routes, and so that we'll have to do more analysis also as sites become or areas become more accessible to people, or different shipping pathways. I mean, who knows? So it's definitely part of the mix. And again, why we're not just doing this once and putting it on the shelf and being done.
Okay, I have another question for you. Nick Zerflu is asking, he's looking forward to the report, but he was curious, were any species in particular that the group keyed in on or were surprising from your analysis?
Oh, I think, well, I'm not sure. Did I stop sharing already? I think I did.
You can still share if you want to. You're still
okay,
presenter.
See if I can show. Yep. I've got a couple. Actually, I have, thanks for that. See if it'll go to my next slide. I have to hide it. Hold on. Here. So actually, water spangles. So this one was interesting. it's native to Central and South America, and I wouldn't have thought that this would be something to worry about, but definitely within the interior region in the Pacific Northwest, that this was interesting to come up as a plant species to be on the lookout for. And it is established in the in areas in Southern California, and so that's but that was surprising that some of the climate matching for the Pacific Northwest, especially when you get into the more arid, higher temp differences with the different ranges that you see things that you wouldn't have, like I wouldn't have thought like Central and South American species could become established. So it was interesting.
Great.
And of course, things that vegetatively reproduce with rhizomes is not fun. So easily spread and hard to get rid of.
Okay, well, I think that is the end of your questions. So thank you so much, Teresa.
Thanks, and thanks for letting me talk on the phone.
Yeah, it worked out. We can hear you just fine.
All right, thanks.
Yep.
Cool, thank you, Teresa. So next, we are going to be shown how to meet them where they're at, an industry approach to AIS prevention by Brant Dupree with the Big Sky Watershed AmeriCorps. And Brant is an AmeriCorps member serving in my old hometown of Missoula, Montana. He's in his second term working on AIS outreach and education through the Upper Columbia Conservation Commission and the Missoula County Weed District. He graduated from North Carolina State with an environmental science degree and moved to Missoula in late 2019, chasing fly fishing and sustainable careers. I can relate. Take it away, Brant.
Awesome. Thanks, Nathan. Can you guys hear me pretty well?
Yes, I
Yep.
can hear you. You just need to be in present. There you go. That's great.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thanks again, Nathan. You kind of took my first slide from me, but going to talk to you guys today about an outreach program that we've had for about 3 years in Western Montana, based on Missoula. That's all about protecting our waters in Montana and just focusing on meeting our industry partners. So, as Nathan already said, I'm in Missoula. It's this gorgeous place that's very centered around water. Western Montana has about 70% of the water in the state. And so we have a lot of focus on water recreationists, anglers, and boaters and everything of that sort. Why that's important is the Columbia River Basin is the last basin in the United States without invasive zebra and quagga mussels. And so we are kind of the last bastion for the lower 48, and we protect a lot of Idaho, Oregon, and Washington from the zebra mussels that have a lot of impacts on, especially things, of course, recreation, but also hydropower. And the Columbia River Basin produces about 40% of the country's hydropower. And so this is something that once we had some mussel detections in 2017 in Tiber Reservoir and Canyon Ferry Reservoir in Montana, which are east of the divide, the state decided to create the Upper Columbia Conservation Commission. And this is the group that I'm a part of. And our focus is to kind of create collaboration and a second border that uses clean, drain, dry, and spreads information about AIS with partners to prevent the spread. And so Western Montana, of course, is a hotspot for boaters and water recreationists. And so since 2019, we've had an outreach project that focuses on the industries that are inside of our basin. And so this is Western Montana. This is all the basins that are inside the Columbia River Basin found in Montana. And so we have a lot of different basins, a lot of popular waterways. And our goal is to reach the industry partners. And these groups are outdoor retailers, boat shops and repair shops, angling shops, and marinas. And so all of these four focus on water in Montana. They focus on serving the people who come to our state to use our waters, or even those inside of our state. And since a lot of these aquatic invasive species, especially mussels, are spread mainly by recreational boaters, this is something that, while our state has a really aggressive and very successful water boat check program, we want to bolster that. And so what we did is we created this program. And so now I'm going to kind of walk through what it looks like to set up these visits that we have. And so what I'll do is I'll call these places, these marinas, these boat shops about 3 weeks before I go into the area. I send an introduction about myself, about our group, about what the state wants, and I kind of gauge interest and see if I can talk to a manager or owner. And so I can talk to them about, handing off materials, giving them things to talk about, talking to their staff if possible, and just spreading a good clean, drain, dry message and saying what kind of aquatic invasive species are in their area. And so 2 weeks before the visit, I'll usually send another email or call them on the phone just to make sure everything's good to go. We can schedule a date and a time. And then at that point, I also ask, because of COVID, how many people will be there? What things do we need to do to mitigate the risk of spreading, things like that? Because we care about our health of the waters, but also the people that we're talking to. And then when we before visit and the day of course, we're packing up materials, which I'll show you guys in a little bit, and just making sure to reach out to partners in the area. The Upper Columbia Conservation Commission works very closely with the statewide Fish, Wildlife, and Parks Aquatic and Invasive Species Program. And so we reach out to them if they're in the area, or other water groups in Montana that are focused on the protection. We have several groups that do voluntary boat inspections, or groups that focus on water quality of lakes like the Flathead Lake. And so we want to reach out to them and kind of share what we're doing and see how we can get support from them locally. And then lastly, we just contact any last group that maybe has not spoken to us yet. And so as we go to visit with these places where they're at, we visit them at their locations. Usually, hopefully, we can sit down and have a good conversation with either a manager or an owner. We have kind of 4 tactics and 4 prompts that we have in these conversations. When these conversations last about 30 minutes to an hour, we have a lot of time to kind of hash out the details, but our 4 focuses is we promote regulations and desired behavior. We talk about the benefits and barriers of clean, drain, dry as a business. We provide information that is promoted by the state or science. And then we have a clear target audience of who we're trying to reach when we do these visits. And so now we'll kind of walk through kind of 2 of those staples that we have. So the first one is promoting regulations and desired behavior. Like I said, we partner very closely with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. And so we like to focus on, per the state, this is what you have to do when you have a watercraft in the state. You have to stop whenever you pass when it's open, whenever you leave the state or leave the Flathead Basin, or when you cross the Continental Divide. This is just a reminder to these businesses as well as their customers that, hey, as a state, this is our best chance at preventing the spread of aquatic invasives. So we just ask that you as a person, but as a business, also support this. And since we do have mussel positive waters that have the veligers that has since 2017 has had no positive test back. So as of next year, we will be mussel free again. But there are special precautions that come with that. If you go to Tiber, when you come out, your boat has to get cleaned. And then we also kind of talk to them how to make these boat stops efficient, how to make sure that these can be as fast as possible and easy on our staff as well as their customers. And so then next, we kind of give them some information from the state. And so this is updating them on aquatic invasive species efforts in the state, updating them if we found more invasives or if we've been able to manage the species that we already have. We can kind of talk them through how to clean, drain, dry any type of boat they might have. A lot of these businesses might focus on rafts or fly fishing, but some focus on motor boats and ballast boats, things like that. So we talk to them about what they might expect from a station and how to kind of jump that hurdle before they get there. And during this portion is when we have a survey that we have that asks questions about their knowledge in AIS, what they believe their customers' knowledge is on AIS, how often they talk about these things, to just have a survey to build upon our program. Since this is our 3rd year, we really have a focus of seeing how we can improve this in the future, how we can bring the best information to these groups, but also get valuable information for us, and so we can make this continue to grow. So now I'll kind of show you guys some of the materials that we hand out. All of these are made through UC3 and also Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. And so these are kind of reminders of what people need to do if they bring a boat into the state, what to look for our fly fishermen, because their equipment can hold invasives like zebra mussels, and Orioles disease just as much as a boat can have curlyleaf pondweed or mussels, right? And so we want to focus that this isn't just watercraft inspections, but also clean, drain, dry all your gear, and here's how. In the lower right corner, you guys will see that we have a map of all the updated watercraft inspection stations in the state, and just a resource that these places can have when people ask if they bring their boat and stay. It's like, hey, where should I stop? Do I need to stop? Things like that can kind of bolster that that conversation. And then the top right is just some swag we give out. Just have some good marketing, is some stickers, some koozies. We have pins and notepads, things like that, just to kind of get all of our audience, as much as audience as we can. That isn't maybe just information, but also just fun things that kind of shows that people say they're a clean boater and they really support our program, or they support having a clean Montana, which we love. The next part of our conversation usually kind of turns into the benefits and barriers of clean, drain, dry. And so this is just kind of sharing benefits of why we want them to clean, drain, dry, and then we ask them, what are the benefits that you perceive of having a clean, drain, dry lifestyle or clean, drain, dry business? And so usually it's, of course, you don't spread invasives when you're clean, drain, dry. Your customers recognize your cleanliness, and you have positives for multiple reasons. Of course, a clean boat is going to make a happy customer. And then there's also the science of feeling good about what you're doing, feeling like you're doing the best you can do. And so some of the common barriers that also come with clean, drain, dry, things that are holding people back from clean, drain, drying is taking too much time, or they're too busy, or a lot of these places are rentals, or they may only stay on one river. Like if they only float the Blackfoot for their group, then they're perceived as low risk. But this is kind of the barriers that we want to decrease, these barriers, and see how can we make these clean, drain, dry guidelines specific enough where you can do them quickly, but also do a good job. And so really good conversations we have these people, and they love talking about their business and their people. And so we really support them as having clean, drain, dry, not as a separate entity, but just perfectly concise and works with what they already do. And then, of course, we talk to them about they have a clear target audience. These places, out of the 4 places we visit, 3 of them, if someone walks in a marina, angling shop, boat shop, 100% chance they're going to be on the water, right? If it's not in Montana somewhere. Outdoor retailers, it's usually about 50-50, but we target these groups for very specific reasons because they are very, very focused on water, and these groups are focused on water in Montana. And so they have a really deep-seated, a great grasp of what they're protecting, how they're going to protect it, and we just want to help them protect it better, and just be good people and sustainable about how they can approach these ideas. And so one thing that we might sometimes bring up is a lot of our conversations kind of based around community-based social marketing. And so we use this graph, which is basically where you compare the behavior that we would like them to have, clean, drain, dry, with the competing behaviors, which is maybe leaving a boat dirty or skipping a check station, right? And so we kind of talk to them about not only as a business, but these are the decisions your customers come up with. So how can we increase the benefits of having a clean, drain, dry boat, and also decrease the barriers of having to clean, drain, dry your boat? And so if you guys have questions about this, please let me know. There's some great books about community-based social marketing, but it really is just a conversation about decision making and how can we make it easier for you to have a good decision, and how can we make it in a way harder for people to make the wrong choice. And so that's a conversation that our group has every year. But a lot of these places are really engaging and talk about these things and have a good heart about what they care for. And so when we talk about they want to increase the benefits that maybe they can even give their customers about having a clean, drain, dry boat, or returning a rental that's clean. And so we just try to help however we can, have a good session, and give them the chance to talk to us and establish a relationship. So about when these visits kind of end, we have a pledge form that we have. Community-based social marketing really supports the program and supports this pledge part where it just says that is a higher rate of success when you give someone a pledge that they sign, and then we'll publicize them on Facebook that says, hey, Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks and the Upper Columbia Conservation Commission is really excited that this marina has partnered with us, and they pledge to have a clean, drain, dry marina. And so this is, of course, paired with our last conversation about the benefits and barriers. And so we say, hey, when you take this pledge to the best of your ability, when you talk to the public, when you deal with the boats on your own time, you will clean, drain, dry. You will stop invasive species, and you will make sure that you're doing your part to keep Montana what it is, which is a great bastion of beautiful water. And so that's kind of how our meetings look. They take about 15 minutes to an hour. A lot of the conversations go on with managers or owners, but sometimes we talk to people who sell licensing or maybe check boats at their marina, things like that. But now I'll kind of walk through, since I've been doing this for 2 years now, I've got to talk to over 120 groups throughout the western part of Montana, and just kind of walk you guys through what these conversations look like and kind of some of the focuses that we have on these specific groups. So here's a rundown of how many groups are in the, or what type of groups are in the basin. For Montana, we have a lot of fishing shops and boat shops and rental shops, of course. And then marinas are a very high focus because they just have a high chance of invasive species introduction. And outdoor retailers are quite large. You have your Cabela's, your REI's, your Shields. And so these are places that there may not be as many numbers, but the amount of traffic they get is very large. And so we try to hit those hard as well. So we'll start with marinas. People on the right, this is kind of the picture that we took at Tamarac's Marina last year. Just shows them having their clean, drain, dry sticker that they can put on their wall, put on their business, and just shows that they're clean, drain, dry. But the conversation that we had here was we wanted to focus on the moored vessels that they have there. A lot of their customers come out of state from places like Utah, Minnesota, Wisconsin, come to Montana for the summer. And so this marina actually does require, or it used to require, that when a boat came to be stored at the marina for the summer, it had to have a proof of inspection. While this can be complicated because some people come in late at night, or last year because of COVID, we didn't hand out any paperwork to prove that. It is showing the concern that groups like Tamarac's, like other marinas in the state, have about, they understand their role could be very high risk when it comes to introducing these species, and so they want to play their part. But as we talk about marinas, of course, these are moored vessels, and so lots of seasonal traffic. All these boats stay in the water from 2 days to the whole season, and so there's a lot of time that these things can be introduced. And then one conversation we also have is asking about if they have time for an inspection. Some marinas have worked with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks in the state to kind of develop their own inspection program. And while it's not as rigorous as a boat check station in the state, it is something that shows that they are concerned, and they can have their own kind of talk with customers about, this is what we're looking for, this is what clean, drain, dry means to us and to you. And so we'd love it if we could look over your boat and just give it a quick inspection. Most people are sure, no problem. Our boats can be here. We understand the risk. We don't want to be a nuisance, which is really great to hear. So marinas have a really good knowledge on how aquatic invasive species, especially mussels, can impact the waters that they're on, and they play a good role of how to stop that. Our next group is boat shops and rental shops. Again, we kind of focus on inspection stations with saying, even if you rent a boat, when you're in state, you need to go by an inspection station if you pass one, of course, and stop and get inspected. Even if your boat stays on the water or one water body, it still needs to be inspected as long as you pass the station with the certain criteria. One thing that we've been really trying to push is after repairs, pull the plug. And by this, I mean the drain plug in the bilge. Just because standing water can stay in your boat and it can harbor these mussels and other invasives for 30 days plus. And so we're really just asking these boat shop owners, if they already don't, because some do, like Lee Marine does, several places up north do, they already pull the plug and just make sure that all the water is drained from these boats. And this just encourages their customers as they tell them, hey, by the way, we pulled the plug, and this is why. Not only is it good for your boat when it comes to the livelihood of it, but also for stopping aquatic invasive species in the state. It just kind of gives an excuse to have a clean, drain, dry conversation with these boaters. And boat shops also sell a lot of boats. In the last year, we've seen a huge increase of boats sold across the state. And so we give them materials that they can hopefully put in a new boater packet, or just telling new boaters, hey, by the way, now that you have a boat in Montana, here are some regulations you have to follow, and not only our boating regulations, but also aquatic regulations when it comes to stopping at inspection stations and doing your part to be clean, drain, dry. Then we have angling and fly shops, which of course is a lot of people going on guided trips, or a lot of people buying licenses. And so there is some AIS fees kind of entwined in that, which is a great way to talk to a lot of our outer staters who might come for a guide service or come to buy a shop or get some advice, to kind of have that, by the way, while you're here buying this license, let's talk about cleaning your waders, or maybe switching from felt sole to rubber sole, right? Focusing on including our information into theirs seamlessly, and making sure that when they talk about which river is great or which fly is great for the season, they can also talk about why it's great that they're stopping at an inspection station on the guided trip, or why they're cleaning their boat after they're done. And so a lot of these guided trips have a high impact on customers, and a lot of these places are mom and pop places that have been open for years, and they're extremely reliable. And the people in the state, in the area, are like, come to these people for advice. And so we really want to kind of make these champions out of these places, because these places are reputable, they have a great reputation, and can really kind of spread our message farther than we can. As an entity, as Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, we can only talk to so many people per year, but the amount of people that go into angling or fly shops or marinas or any of these groups is a massive number. And if we can have them on our side, it's extremely important to try that, and just educate these groups so they can spread that message further. But in general, fly shops, angling shops are really good on, a lot of these groups are on the water every single day. And so they see the impacts of things like curly pondweed or Eurasian water milfoil on trout fisheries. And so they kind of understand, to some extent, the damages that have been done and can be done if we allow this to go further. So they have a really good conscious state. Our final group is outdoor retailers, which is our most broad group. And so these are places like REI, Cabela's, that have a small watercraft section, but they have fishing section as well, and hunting, things like that. And so sometimes in these conversations, we talk about terrestrial weeds, but our focus is clean, drain, dry, protecting our waters. And so usually with these groups, we talk to the people that run the stations that sell licensing, things like that, because they probably get the most questions out of everyone else about clean, drain, dry. Do I need to stop at inspection stations, things like that. But when a large crowd comes in like that, you never know, maybe 20, 30, 40% of the people in there might be focused on water, but it is still a great partner to have, because while these businesses might be based in other places in the country, the people that work there are just as ingrained in the water system as I am. These people fish and hunt in these local waters, and so they want to help protect our waters just as much as the state does, just as much as any other person who enjoys our waters does. So it's really important to kind of key in on that and say, work with their employees, see if you can talk to their whole staff, and just give them the clean, drain, dry message so they can spread it to all the people they work with, but also as they go out and enjoy Montana's waters. So kind of to talk about the outcomes of the last 2 years, we've created about 100 partners, which is awesome. As you can see on the right, this is a group I talked to last February. And I was able to talk to their whole staff about, this is why we clean, drain, dry, this is kind of how, and this is the impact that mussels can have. And this group was a great starting point for me, because it really showed that these people care and these people are willing to learn, right? Overall, there's been very positive feedback from all the groups that we've talked to. There's a lot of support in the state, because people just know the poster child mussels, and they know that the impacts it can have, because a lot of these people have moved from Minnesota or been in the Great Lakes or have seen Lake Mead, places like that, and how rigorous that some of the programs have to be. Montana has great water, and these people want to protect it because this is their livelihood. And for a lot of them, it's also where they recreate and enjoy their weekends. Overall, I'd say that these groups have about an average knowledge on AIS. Nothing great, but it's growing. A lot of these people, when we do visits, we focus on mussels, but in the past year, we really tried to talk about other species past mussels, and so things like Eurasian water milfoil, Asian clams, other species that are established in this state, and while maybe not as detrimental as mussels, it's still something that we should watch out for when they're cleaning boats, when they're repairing boats, when they're renting out rafts, things like that. And so just really trying to focus on all taxa of invasives, especially aquatics, and not just mussels. And so I'm just trying to grow, since a lot of these places I've talked to twice now in the last 2 years, just trying to increase the knowledge that we're handing out. And of course, in the future, we want more presentations. COVID has made that an issue, and we totally understand that. And we know that, and we hope that when we talk to these managers, these owners, they pass that down to their employees. But of course, when you get your whole staff of people in the room, it's just fantastic, because it can just lead to so many good conversations and so many good topics that you can cover. So as we kind of roll out the end of this season, we're going to have some more data coming out, of course, about what these groups thought about this year, and how this year has gone for them with clean, drain, dry things. But being in person like I do, and I travel all across Western Montana, it takes a lot of time. And thankfully, my role is largely committed to this. But it just takes time to do, and it takes a lot of travel time, a lot of communication, a lot of work. But a person like myself with an AmeriCorps grant, with kind of wants the experience, and it works really well. There's a lot of support that we get from other groups like ourselves, UC3, but also Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, CMIS, Central Eastern Montana Invasive Species Task Force. There's a lot of groups that support us and give us the materials we need and kind of support us as we're traveling. And we're trying to leave a contact also. And so leaving my card is something that we really try to do, or leaving my boss's card who will be here next year. It's just leaving a contact really just increases the reliability and connection. These people feel a lot better when you leave a card with them, because they're like, wow, if I have a question, I can ask Brant later. Hey, I actually thought about this, or a staff member came up. What do you think about this? And so just making this a very human connection with these groups that's saying, hey, I work for Upper Columbia Conservation Commission with Clean Drain Dry, Quagga Invasive Species Program, but I'm here to talk about this. Let's be candid. Let's have time and give them the chance to kind of talk about how they really feel. We've got some great advice from these people about how to reach boaters, how to reach their customers. And it's just a really good candid conversation that by leaving a card, by extending a hand, we can kind of meet them halfway and see how we can protect our waters. And for marinas, we really want them to play a key role in assessing AIS risk. As I've said, the boats that come there are usually out of state and spend a lot of time in the water. And so when we talk about how mussels get into the state, that's a big risk factor that we have. And so we're really seeing if marinas, if they have the staff, which has been an issue recently, can they check these boats? Can you maybe have someone on staff who knows how to check boats? And can we give you a list of mussel-fouled water? So if you see a boat's coming from Michigan, you might be a little bit more keen on looking over that boat than a boat that came from Seeley Lake, a boat that came from a local water body. And then finally, since we really can't meet with all the staff, a lot of these people are seasonal, and so they might only be on from, say, May to October. Can we create a video that kind of gives a short brush of what we do, like a short little talk about Clean Drain Dry? How can you do that as a boat shop owner, or as a dock worker for Marina for the summer, or maybe you're selling licenses at REI for a year, and just see how we can integrate these people more into the Clean Drain Dry program. So overall, these are some of the partners we made. They're great, fantastic people. Like I said, over 120 groups met. As of this year, we've had the program expanded over to the whole state of Montana, which has been awesome and such a great success in spreading the Clean Drain Dry message and just making more partners, making these people, meeting with people who care about the water just as much as we do, and just giving them the information that they can take it on their own, make it their own mission, and integrate it into their businesses. It's great. These people are awesome, and really excited to have this program continue in the future and just keep up the good work. And so with that, let me know if you guys have questions. My email's right there. Reach out if you guys want any advice or anything like that. But other than that, I'm all good.
Great, thank you, Brant. I do have a question for you. So Tom Booth asked, have you done any follow-up to quality assurance, quality control? So sorry, I'm just trying to read your sentence down. For those that have done pledging, how are those doing with messaging those users, I guess, for those businesses that pledged?
Sure, really good question. Since this program's gone on for about 3 years, we really do have a focus on making sure throughout the years, how's this program grown? And so what we've done this year is we kind of have a questionnaire that we have that I mentioned, but there's 3 questions on there. That one is, since last year, did your information grow? Where do you get your information from? Another metric that we use is how many people still have things out, or where do they keep them? Because a lot of these places I roll up and I see all the materials that we give in them, these pamphlets, these stickers out in the open that everyone can see, but some people have them stuffed under their desk, right? And so for quality assurance, we're really just trying to see, 1, how many times do these people talk about AIS? And 2, do they still have the information out that we've given them? Because when we leave, of course, we can't control what they talk about, but at least we can try to help and make our messaging, our marketing a little bit more forward in people's minds when they see Protect Our Water stickers, or we give them like these huge 3x5 signs that they sometimes put up, or like these like big stickers on their windows, right? So it's just retention value of the materials we give them is our biggest metric so far. But next year we're hoping to get some more questions that ask like, did you learn from last year? Or what other things you want to talk about? Did your staff seem to be more inclined to talk about AIS after my meeting with you, right? But really good question.
Okay, thanks, Brant. I have another question for you. In general, would you say that one stakeholder group displayed more or less knowledge about the AAS regulations in place? And if so, do you have any idea why?
I would say marinas do. I think marinas have a lot of focus, and since they have a lot of out-of-state boats, and a lot of their people that bring these boats in are, 99% chance they've been through a station, right? And so these people have talked about this, and a lot of the marinas in the state have actually had people that have gone through classes, or they ask us like, hey, where can I learn more about AIS? And some marinas are really high up there when it comes to what they know about, what they talk about, especially with mussels, since they're so scared of mussels and so scared of being the marina that's known as the one who introduced mussels to Western Montana, right? But other groups like fly fishermen, especially like fly fishing, angling shops, have really good knowledge. And a lot of that, I think, is because the presentation we saw earlier today talked about what people are worried about when it comes to aquatic invasive species, and a lot of that is fisheries. And so, since a lot of these angling places, if their river isn't as good as the fish as it used to be, they'll lose customers, right? And so, those angling shops have a really good presence about things like Royling's disease and things that can be spread through waders, but not quite as high as marinas, I would say. But I only talk to the owners, things like that, so I don't get to talk to all the guides, and so that could be totally wrong.
Okay, thank you, Brant. Excellent. Well, I think that wraps up all of our questions for you. Thank you for presenting. Appreciate the information. Now it's on to you, Dennis.
All right, well, thank you everyone, to the presenters and to Nate for moderating today, and of course Leah for facilitating the meetings to date so far. Tomorrow we will reconvene with our business meeting. So we'll be talking about QZAP and committee reports, election results, task force, and some legislative updates from our very own Quagga czar, Stephen Phillips. And so please do join us this afternoon or this evening on Zoom for Bingo with Booze. The link can be found on Facebook and I believe on the WRP page, but it's a Zoom link. And Leah, can you remind me where else that link can be found?
I did email it to the entire listserv.
Great.
That would have been a few days ago, and then it's on the website. That's probably the easiest, quickest way to find it. Go to the website.
Great. So hopefully we'll be seeing you all this evening, and I think you have to download some bingo cards in preparation for that. So hopefully we'll be seeing you all in about 2 hours. All right. Thanks again, everyone. Have a good night.